Solve the World, Episode 13, Heaven Above. From DTS's 50 People I Pity, entry number 7. Dr. Seuss. I'm all for pushing imagination far. I'm even particularly prone to agree that helping jumpstart a child's imagination is of paramount importance. This is all well and good. Amongst the legion artists, philosophers, and humble teachers who directed their gifts towards the expansion of the mind of the youth, none rise above Theodore Seuss Geisel, whom we all know affectionately as Dr. Seuss. His problem, however, lies in gambling. He was a gambling man, and he shouted its virtue from the pulpit. Case in point, McGilligut's Pond. At the behest of this tale, we find a young boy merrily fishing in McGilligut's Pond. An older man informs the boy that there's nothing alive in the small pond, only garbage. He relates that he knows this from experience. The amiable lad's response fills out the remainder of the short story. The child happily voices his opinion that the pond perhaps goes deep underground and connects with a river which eventually meets up with the ocean. Under this hypothesis, then, it is entirely reasonable that one could expect to catch a fish or two in McGilligut's Pond. The thought alone that the pond somehow could miraculously reach the sea is unreasonable at best. But the lad's just begun. He goes on to envision legions and myriads of fish, whatsits, and hoosers all vying for a spot in the luxury vacation spot that is McGilligut's Pond. He envisions creatures that surely don't even exist. A fish that's partially a cow, a sea beast that dwarfs a whale, insanity upon insanity upon insanity. If one is merely imagining the unknown, then all this is fine. But there's a much darker reality occurring here. The boy isn't merely daydreaming, he's betting his life on an impossibility. At best, he's going to waste his day ever adding chips to his gobbledygook conviction that life will find a way to McGilligut's Pond. Once again, if he were merely assuming that such a life force was possibly beneath the waters, well then okay, you take a bet and you lost. But he's forcibly denying the spoken words of an experienced sage. Here's what will happen to this boy. He'll wait all day for a fish to show up. But the fish never will. He'll come home for dinner, only to return on his next available Saturday to continue his quest to recapture the strangest nether creature of the Seaverse. When Bobby invites him to play cowboys and Muslim extremists, he'll reject his best friend because he's all tied up with his fateful gamble. Years go by, and time after time the lad's put all his chips on McGilligut's Pond, to the point in which his whole worldview is in the clutches of this one expectation. The boy will become a shell of his former self as each day stabs him with the sting of unmet expectation and deep regret for time lost. The gorgeous Mary Collins he'll never meet, and he'll never marry because he wasted away all his life at McGilligut's Pond. Any analysis of Seuss's works will reveal the same aberration time in and time out. A single individual hopes for the imaginary to become his reality. Seuss, he was a great man, a great artist, a great wonderer. But he entrapped his characters and perhaps himself, wishing for a morrow that just can't be. Remember. It's never too late to fold. Hold sacred the chips that still remain. Forget you ever met McGilligut's Pond, and with that, let life surpass your modest expectations, lest you be sullied to learn that your hopes reach farther than the horizon. Back to Huck. Back and forth he sways, as the happy pachyderm carries the Queen of Egypt on his back. 2 days had harrowingly drifted by since Jenn fell asleep to the moans of her roommate. Since the sobbing bout, Jenn had neither seen nor heard from Tiff, nor had Jenn eyed her rejected Romeo. Those days, seemingly the apple of the world's eye, should have been deliriously lovely. In later adventures, when Jenn wanted for warmth, food, and companionship, she'd dwell on those days, perpetually chastising herself for not soaking in the performance, living out the dream with open arms and wide eyes. Unfortunately, however, reality for Jennifer Dash was filling up with internal congestion and angst. A reaping was coming. This seemed predetermined. Jenn had no schemes or plans whatsoever for accomplishing her true task as an undercover agent for the homeless mob. The Patriot could do anything to her. He could snipe her out of the equation. Jenn knew she was a mere pawn amidst a circus of galloping rooks and bishops. She was currently feeding off the king's teat, sure enough, but he was not a generous dictator. Look what happened to Flusher. Who knows what he did wrong? But all it took was his likeness drawn onto a cat, and that was that. He was done, snuffed out. The date was October 27th, only a few days until Veneration celebration, only a few days until the end of her temporary employment. Jenn needed a plan. October 31st. That was the day to get out of Dodge. If she waited until the revealing, it might already be too late. Patriot might come to foreclose on his investment. Yes, Halloween was the night of escape, the night of freedom. Jenn surmised that the holiday might somehow aid her. It might give her cover. She spent hours atop hut pondering this fateful hour. She figured she could dress up as something. After all, she had a few bucks cash. She could buy a mask and head west. Or north. Look where I ended up last time I went west. Jenn thought to herself, that won't do. I already tried stumbling upon Leviathan. Guideline number 8. When escaping, know beforehand what you're escaping to. And there was the rub. Jenn had nowhere to go. She was not going to go backwards. No more Louisiana. She'd been through that front screen door. This was not over. Quitting wasn't an option. There was nothing to quit into. North. Where would she go if she went north? San Francisco was north. Seattle, northerner. Canada, northerner still. Alaska, maybe northernest. Anchorage would be far enough away. And maybe that close to the top of the planet? Maybe that's close enough to the curtain behind life. Maybe it would lead to some solving the world leads. Maybe ancient leviathanic creatures stay up north, away from the awful stench of gluttonous humanity. Yes, maybe north. Guideline 8, when escaping, know beforehand what you're escaping to. No. North wasn't a proper answer. North isn't a place, it's an idea. And Jenn had had already enough ideas to float her whole life on. Now she needed concretes. She needed reals, not perceives. She didn't care what old kind Mr. Berkeley said. Jenn needed to believe in what she could see, hear, taste, smell, and touch. Especially touch. North. Where north? A specific location. What location? Could she ask anyone? A coworker, maybe. Clarence or Susan? Or what about the boy in the litter? The one that carried me off? Everett. Yeah, what about Everett? Jenn gazed down at the Egyptian-dressed guard dancing about the crowd at her back left. As if his spidey senses were tingling, he caught Jen's glance immediately. They locked eyes. He smiled. Jenn averted further contact. No. Co-workers were too easy. If Patriot wanted her, co-workers would be the first people he'd put the screws on. What Jenn didn't know was that faithful, madly in love with her Everett would die before giving her up. If she came to him, he'd be faithful to the end. He'd hide her. He'd protect her. He'd die mouth shut even under the strictest regimens of torture if that proved to her that his love was real. It wasn't a sham built off of a $1,000 suit and restricted access to St. Drogo's at a moment's notice. What about that primly dressed older Don Juan? What about Antonio d'Anconia? Could Jenn use him to hide away from the Patriots' underground fits? Maybe, but she'd scared him off, and she had no way of contacting him. No number, no address, nothing. A darker thought scurried through Jen's mind. I could wait out in front of St. Drogo's at 9 p.m., wait for him before he hooks up with his next catch of the day. But that wasn't fair. He was a perfect gentleman to her. She said no and he gave in. He and that beautiful face of his. Even so, even if Jen's darker intuitions were correct about Antonio, did she dare risk her life on it? Assuming she did catch him, why would he do anything for her? He wouldn't, not in that situation. Annoyance is not attractive and does not lead people to acts of kindness. Jen's own short life had provided plenty of insight already to that deep truth. What about Mrs. Moose? The keys and clicker. Jenn hadn't returned them. They were still at the hotel. She could hike up to Santa Barbara and hide out in her mansion. If it's just the ancient lady living there, then surely she could hulk around the home for days, maybe even weeks before being noticed, and no one would expect it. Maybe she could even befriend the artist, get her to join Jen's side. After all, Jenn wasn't anti-patriot. She just didn't want to be in the crosshairs of a war she didn't understand. Surely the old lady would get that. Surely she would have compassion. It was something. This. It was a plan. Maybe it wasn't the best blueprint ever conceived. But it was something, and that something evaded breaking guideline number 8, and that was something indeed. Jenn failed to think through the obvious, though. The Patriot wasn't a dimwit, and therefore was cognizant that Jenn hadn't yet returned the keys. If she went missing, he'd call up Mrs. Moose as long as the keys remained unfound. Perhaps Jenn would have come upon this realization had she not suddenly been distracted by the emergence, seemingly out of nowhere, of Antonio d'Anconia. "Good afternoon," he said, smiling up at her. Jenn couldn't help it. Her heart stopped, her lungs betrayed her, and she couldn't find breath. She'd written him off already. What was he doing here? He was supposed to be scared off, yet here he was, those kissable lips waiting for her once more. "Hi," Jenn managed to awkwardly stammer out. "Hello, Jennifer." Unlike last time, Jenn wasn't going to dismount her elephant just yet. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to apologize." "These are the days." "Okay." "Days of calm." Jenn's courage flooded in as her cheeks blushed red. Then apologized. "Days of reckoning." "Jennifer calling?" "I'm sorry. Admittedly, our evening didn't go as I had planned." "What you had planned was not acceptable. Stern face. Don't betray your stoic demeanor." "You're right. I'm sorry. I messed up. Can I make it up to you?" A loaded question. Jenn had to know how he planned to make it up to her. She wanted this. And just like that, everything was forgiven. Her facade melted as she meekly smiled at the man. "What did you have in mind?" "Meet me at St. Drogo's." What a slap in the face. The same date again? Who was it that said the proof of insanity was doing the same thing over and expecting a different result? "No!" she screamed out. Antonio shrugged Jenn's frustration off with a smirk. "Meet me there tonight, and I want to show you something. Something new, and I know you're gonna love it." He bounded off before she could answer. "Wait, what should I wear?" Jenn shouted at Antonia's back. He either didn't hear, or in his high sense of mysteriousness chose not to. "Goodness, what am I gonna wear?" Everett sneered below. Jenn never noticed. Once more she was floating above all the tension, all the anticipatory dread. Her love had returned, repentant and ready to lick all her wounds. The night would end differently this time. He knew what to expect out of her. She wouldn't be able to scare him off a second time. "Meet me at St. Drogo's at midnight." The hours before midnight crawled at a sickeningly slow pace. So slow, in fact, that Jenn did indeed get sick. She threw up in her motel room toilet at around 10:45. Luckily, Jenn thought, the sickness did provide a wormhole through the last hour before midnight. Choosing casual as a form of rebellion, and that's what you get itis. Jenn showed up at St. Drogo's in jeans and a plain white tee. Unlike the last time, Jenn beat Antonio there. She waited by the gates, slightly worried by the dark. There wasn't a light on in the mansion. Was it even open? Jenn's employee badge got her into the park and passed all the security clearances. But what good was it if everything in the park was closed? There was no watch on Jenn's wrist. If she'd had one, she'd have known that her impatience was well earned. By 12:20, there remained no sign of Antonio. Was it a trick? Had he stood her up? Was there meaning in this? Was Antonio an agent for the Patriot? For the parrots? It's a trap! A sudden rush of anxiety gripped Jenn. Standing at the gates of a once-forbidden palace in the middle of the night felt unnervingly vulnerable. Choosing safety over adventure, Jenn hastily began walking away. It wasn't worth all this wait-and-see trauma. Antonio wasn't exactly a paragon of trustworthy people either. "Where are you going, love?" Antonio whispered into Jenn's ear. She spun, half frightened, half exhilarated. He wore just about as fancy a tuxedo as Jenn could imagine a tuxedo being. He grabbed her by the waist and pulled her in. "You give up on me?" "Just about. Come on. I have something to show you." Antonio released his hold on Jenn's waist, preferring to hold her hand as he led her. They weren't headed to St. Drogo's. At a quickened pace, this Romeo of the night led Jenn deeper into the park, to the center, to the focus point, to Saints Row. A minute later, and they were there, standing in the shadows of a magnificent covered tent. Any remaining doubt about what was happening was ripped away by Antonio's next statement. "For our first date, I took you to St. Drogo's. But any schmuck with a big enough checkbook could get you into there. I want to take the most beautiful girl in the world to a place no one can go, but everyone wants to. No amount of money could get us tickets in." Antonio pulled Jenn in by the hand and kissed her anew. The release from that kiss was as dramatic as its beginning touch. Antonio wanted to finish his speech. "I can show you a world that no one else can share with you. I love you, Jenn." They kissed again, the first kiss of Jenn's short life that she found unnerving. Jenn had seen enough movies in her day to know that saying, "I love you," is a big deal. So soon? How could he love her? He didn't know her. He barely knew her name. He had no idea where she grew up, what her favorite color was. They'd had one evening in conversation, and at that, Jenn was too punch-drunk to even remember much of what they talked about the other night. Did she love him? No. A door. Antonio typed a series of numbers into the keypad. Unlock. Into the great mystery. Into the tent. The first entrance led only to a beige corridor no more than 15 feet long. At the end of said corridor, another security clearance, this one with a thumb scanner. Antonio's thumb seemed to do the trick, as the new door awaited them, blinked green around its frame, but it didn't yet open. "Limited consciousness, Russian superior, heaven above. 86-86-68-86-0703. The blinking faded. Then, nothing. Damn, give it a sec to restart, then I'll try again. Another moment and the door was once more silhouetted in red. Thumb scan. Green blinking. Limited consciousness, Russian superior, heaven above. 86-68-68-86-0703. Green gone. Door still locked. An awkward laugh. "Sorry about this." Antonio took out a phone from his pocket and begun fiddling with it. They were breaching into the new ride at Magical Kingdom. Jenn would soon know the very secret she was cast to uncover. What a wonderful coincidence. Someone up there's looking after me, Jenn thought. And her thoughts brought to mind a hazy figure telling her something important. A half-remembered phrase. "With all your lungs." What on earth did that mean, and who said it to her? Jenn couldn't comprehend where this memory came from, or what its center of gravity was. But the inflection in that phrase, "with all your lungs," rang in Jenn's mind as something with urgency, like something that mattered. This was it, the answer to all things. Jenn would see the new ride, report immediately to the Patriot, and everything would be fine. She would have paid her debt, perhaps handsomely rewarded, and then, with the job all wrapped up, she'd be free to go about her day. Free. Jenn free dash. How quickly this world had turned inside out, along with an extinguishing of Jenn's free spirit. She didn't feel free at all anymore. In fact, all the glamour of being Cleopatra, the intrigue of being at the center of espionage, none of it felt freeing at all. Standing in the beige corridor between two heavily sealed and fortified doors, Jenn, for the first time, felt homesick. Not homesick for her life behind her front screen door, but for those precious few magical days out on her own, hearing stories of ancient monsters, escaping from intimidating, but ultimately powerless, truck drivers, making friends with the Further family. All of it was so open and lovely. Now the whole of her future rested on her lover's ability to hack into this amusement park ride. Trapped between two doors, neither of which Jenn had power to choose. Ah, got it. Okay. Antonio highlighted something on his phone. Okay, Jenn. Here's the thing. I messed up the audible password, and as far as I understand, it's a 3 strikes and you're out sort of thing. I'm, of course, allowed through. But if the system locks us out, we'll have to hide you. If they find out I smuggled a no-name in, then we'll all be neck-deep in poop. Neck-deep in poop? What an annoyingly boyish turn of phrase. D'Anconia's suit alone had to be worth 5 figures, and yet he speaks in such sophomoric hues? What's up with that? And furthermore, where was Jenn supposed to hide? They were trapped in essentially a small hallway with no exits, no windows, no escape. Jenn tried to cool her rapid breathing, tried to calm her impending sense of claustrophobic panic. Just do it, Jenn said in an unmistakable tone of contempt. Limited consensus, Russian Superior Heaven Above, 86-86-68-86-0703. Solid green. Door open. A rush of sweet, cool air wafted in on the couple. Jenn sighed in relief and smiled up at her prince. All was forgiven. The only thing to fear was, after all, fear itself. Smiling broadly back at her, Antonio proclaimed, "Welcome to the newest addition to St. Anthony's Peak, Heaven Above." Crucial data received. The name and future location of the new ride. Name, Heaven Above. Location, St. Anthony. Just like that. Done and done. The couple took 3 intrepid steps into the cool breeze. A general fog descended on them, and Jenn couldn't quite make out much of anything. A few more steps brought to line of sight 2 plush, reclined chairs. They looked like an artistic blend of movie theater seating and a dentist chair. Antonio took Jenn's hand and motioned for her to take a seat. Finding a way into the chair was somewhat tricky, however. It figured out to be closer to a bed than a chair. Jenn imagined herself resting in one of those first-class chairs on airplanes that magically extend out to a bed. Clearly, that's what this ride was, the layman's first opportunity to sit first class. Once she was securely in, she mannerly buckled the seatbelt that overlaid not just her waist, but also extended out diagonally over both shoulders. Quite a snug fit. Antonio followed suit. As soon as he buckled himself in, jolt! Jenn clawed Antonio's hand. What was happening? Was it breaking? Was there an earthquake? Was the world ending? The first-class dentist chair buzzed, and to Jenn's amazement, extended further, pushing itself into a nearly horizontal axis. It really was a first-class chair, after all. But more ominous than the mere seat extension, the twosome suddenly felt unhinged. Were they moving? Jenn looked around. There was nothing to see. She tried her best to look behind her to see if the glowing green door was still visible. Yes, it was there, but it was vanishing. They were moving. The ride was on. This was happening, and all in the dark. Hold on. The first part's intense. Jenn tried to search Antonio's eyes for safety, but it was too dark. She couldn't even see her fingers in front of her, let alone his face. This was utter pitch black. For just a blink of the eyes, Jenn was somewhere else. Just for a small, minuscule moment. Just then. Just that instant. Just. She saw 4 walls. 4 dirty walls. They weren't moving. They weren't doing anything. They were just there, mocking her. They were evil walls. Something was seeping through them, pushing itself through the wall like a leaky sponge. Something broken. Oh God in heaven. It was feces. Putrid. The smell. Brown. Putrid poop. Neck deep in poop. Neck deep in poop. Then, light. Sweet, beautiful light. They were flying towards it. Streaks all around them, as if Jenn and Antonio were stuck inside an arcade game. The streaks held their form for an instant, and then they blazed into being as a storm of flooding wind knocked the couple back in the palm of their seats forcefully. They were zooming. 50, 60, 100, 1,000 miles an hour. Who knew? Maybe they found a way to break the speed of light. Jenn couldn't figure the physics of it, but whatever the case, it was exhilarating, and she was so happy to experience this rush, to be freed from the menacing brown walls. Jenn rushed out a shriek of glee. Antonio joined in with his own shouts as he lifted his hands in the air. The chairs jolted forward. The two spun in circles. Not fast, not quite slow. The effect was absolutely breathtaking. They were unhinged, floating. What more? Stars. Multitudes. Lighting up the darkness in every direction. 360 degrees of bursting beams of radiance. A few revolutions, and they weren't spinning anymore. They floated majestically. Jenn's eyes pined for the beauty shimmering just beyond her fingertips. What heaven! What ecstasy! Jenn hadn't noticed, but an arm had come up between the two of them. There was something akin to a joystick, and 2 buttons. One button glowed blue. It read, "To the nearest star." Another green, to the sun. Go ahead, you can press the green button if you'd like. That'll end the ride right now, Antonio whispered, for it was so quiet in here. Jenn, numbly aware that any alteration might ruin this beyond mystical moment, whispered back, Not yet. I'm enjoying this too much. Are you? He said in a sly way. Jenn took her eyes off the light display to gently push the joystick-looking device. To her amusement, they bobbed along through space in the direction she moved the stick. There was so much color now. She moved toward one particular cluster of stars, and as she did so, fountains of color beamed out from the galaxy, navy blues mixed in with bright oranges, shimmers of red juxtaposed against high violets. The colors flowed like a river just past her fingertips. Jenn believed that if she were able to catch the colors in her mouth, she'd actually be able to taste the contours of its beauty. A look across revealed Antonio up to some mischief. He had fumbled out his phone and was presently accessing some sort of app. Aha, he said under his breath. A button pushed, and just like that, both Jenn's and his buckles became unhinged, unlocked. Antonio masterminded this scenario and moved in for the kill. He kissed Jenn. Jenn found herself displeased. She was enthralled by the ride. She could marvel at Antonio later. She didn't want to be interrupted, but interrupted she was. Antonio's hands were busy. He drew his hands all over Jenn, reaching under her shirt. No! No! Jenn said and pushed Antonio away. It's okay. We're safe here. And he moved back in. No! No! Didn't matter. He sat up and somehow leaned in on top of her. He was far stronger than her. He kissed her lips. He kissed her cheeks, her ears, her neck. With all your lungs. Scream, old girl. Scream with all your lungs. Now. She did. Jenn screamed so loud her own ears shook in displeasure. Antonio jumped up. He fell back into his own seat. Frantically, he tried to rebuckle himself down. Shh! Stop it! I'm off! Shh! Be quiet before someone hears. Jenn didn't stop. She screamed for her safety. She screamed for herself. She screamed for freedom. Lights up. Everything was lit up. They were suspended in the center of a large warehouse. Lights down. Then red lights flashing. A siren. What have you done? Antonio shouted at Jenn incredulously. Jenn didn't know what she'd done, but she was certain her screams had given her a one-way ticket to neck-deep in poop. Hey guys, this is Dante Stack. All the music and sound effects used in this episode and every other episode of Soul of the World are appropriately attributed on our show notes page at dantestack.com. Have you considered donating 10 cents for every episode? That's a bargain. 10 cents. No one even cares about 10 cents. A dime. Most people don't care about a dime. If you found a dime on the floor, would you even bother to pick it up? Next time you do see a dime, do pick it up and send it my way. I'll take tips, guys. We have a tip jar icon on dantestack.com. I'd appreciate it if you go there and for every episode you listen, toss me 10 cents. So, this is episode 13, so I'm up to $1.30 now. So where's my $1.30, guys? Where's my $1.30? No, in all honesty, I appreciate the tips, and 10 cents an episode sounds pretty fair to me, huh? See you next time.
Hello, I'm Laura from the Netherlands. I've listened to all 100 episodes of Jenn's story. Jenn's not free yet, not hardly. Stay with her. Keep her company as she braves her uncertain future. She'll need a miracle now just to see daylight, let alone solve the world.